You know, when a country decides to go to war, it's not just about weapons and soldiers. It's about having a story, a justification. But what makes that story? What makes a war actually seem legitimate? Well, it turns out the rules for that aren't written in stone. Not at all. They change, and they've changed a lot.
So, that's what we're going to dig into today, this ever-evolving, unwritten rulebook of war. We'll look at the ancient codes that still pop up, how the very idea of who's worth saving has been totally rewritten, and we'll even get into how modern tech is throwing curveballs that philosophers of the past couldn't have even dreamed of.
All right, so let's kick things off with the foundational framework. Basically, the ethical blueprint nations have used for centuries to decide when it's okay to fight.
So this really is the big one, isn't it? Can a war ever be just? I mean, this is a question that has haunted everyone, from generals to regular citizens for, well, forever. It's so heavy that it led people to build a whole framework, not to make war easier, but to try and wrap their heads around its awful moral weight. And that framework is what we call just war theory. Now, this isn't some law you'd find in a book. Think of it more like a living tradition, a collection of ideas cooked up over centuries by thinkers like St. Augustine and Thomas Aquinas. They were literally trying to draw some moral lines in the sand on the battlefield. Okay, and what's so smart about this theory is how it splits the problem into three parts. First, you've got jus ad bellum. That's Latin for right to war, which asks, why are we even fighting? Is our reason a good one? Then there's just en bellum, or justice in war. This is all about how you fight. Are you protecting civilians? Are you acting ethically? And finally, jus post bellum, justice after war, which is about how you end it. How do you build a just peace? These three pillars, this is the foundation for everything we're going to talk about.
Okay, so now that we have that framework, let's look at how a key piece of it, this idea of protecting humanity, has changed. And I mean, it's changed dramatically. Because the answer to the question, who is worth saving? Well, it used to be very, very different.
If you look back to the 19th century, you'd be surprised how often countries intervened for what they called humanitarian reasons. You saw European powers stepping into the Ottoman Empire all the time, saying they had to stop atrocities. But, and this is a big but, there was a very clear pattern in who they decided was worth saving.
And this quote just nails that sentiment perfectly. When the British leader William Gladstone called the Ottoman Sultan the Great Assassin, it was powerful stuff. It totally worked to rally public support for intervention. But why did it work? Because the victims he was talking about were Christian Armenians, and that specific profile was key to getting European audiences on board.
So here's the bottom line. Back then, the unwritten rule was basically, we intervene to protect other Christians. That's it. The sources are really clear on this. You didn't see European powers jumping in to save Jews from pogroms or Muslims from massacres elsewhere. But then came World War II, the UN, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, and the rulebook got a massive rewrite. The goal, at least in theory, became protecting all of humanity.
Right, so the definition of humanity got bigger, but that's not the only rule that changed. The how became just as important as the who. The idea of one country acting all by itself, even for a good reason, started to look, well, wrong.
And that's because, after 1945, this really powerful new norm took hold. The thinking went like this. If you're going to use your military to go save people, you cannot and should not do it alone. You need backup. You need a coalition. And the gold standard? Getting the stamp of approval from the United Nations. This became the new test for whether an intervention was legitimate.
And you can see this rule playing out all over the place after the Cold War ended. Think about it. Protecting the Kurds in Iraq, the huge UN mission in Cambodia, the effort to stop the famine in Somalia. Every single one of these was a team effort. They were all multilateral, all justified as humanitarian missions.
But you know what's really fascinating? The exceptions. They actually prove the rule. Take a look at these interventions where a country went in alone. India in 71, Tanzania in 79, Vietnam also in 79. In each case, they could have made a huge humanitarian argument for what they were doing, but they didn't. Why? Because they knew the world would shut them down if they claimed to be on a solo humanitarian mission. So instead, they played it safe and just said self-defense. That shows you just how strong this new Act Together rule had become. And that brings us to a really pivotal moment. A moment when this entire multilateral rulebook, which had been built up for half a century, was about to be challenged, big time.
So what happens if the rules say you have to act together, but the most powerful country on Earth decides, you know what, I'm going it alone? Suddenly, in the early 2000s, this wasn't just a thought experiment. The 2003 invasion of Iraq. That became the test case. It put the entire post-war order on trial.
You have to remember the context. After the absolute shock of 9/11, the old ways of thinking about security just felt broken. To key figures in the Bush administration, the UN seemed way too slow, too bureaucratic. So they championed a brand new and pretty radical idea. America needed the right to launch a preventive war, to strike first, even if it meant going it alone. This wasn't just a small tweak. This was an attempt to tear up the old rulebook and write a completely new one.
And the contrast with the first Gulf War just a decade earlier is just stunning. Back in 1991, the thinking was all about caution. It was strategic. President George H.W. Bush and his team were worried about stability, about keeping their huge international coalition together. That was the old rulebook, followed to the letter.
Flash forward to 2002, and the whole vibe is different. It's confident, almost swaggering. Proponents of the invasion weren't just saying it was necessary, they were saying it would be easy. For the world's sole superpower, it would be a cakewalk. I mean, that is a complete 180 from the cautious, team-based approach that had defined the years before.
So, the Iraq War really shook up the rules about when and why you fight. But today, there's a new challenge, and it's coming from technology. It's challenging the very basics of how wars are fought, and it's pushing those ancient ethical ideas we talked about to the absolute breaking point.
And this is the question, right? Can a machine follow the rules of war? This is the heart of the debate around what are called LAWS, Lethal Autonomous Weapons Systems. Yeah, we're talking about killer robots, systems that can find, identify, and take out a human target all on their own. The question isn't just about human soldiers anymore, it's about whether an algorithm can be moral.
And look, this is not some far-off sci-fi thing that only a few people worry about. The general public is really uncomfortable with this. You look at the data, and big majorities of people all over the world, including right here in the US, are against the idea of letting a machine make that final call. There's just this gut feeling that taking the human out of that decision is a step too far.
This is where it all comes back to that just war theory we started with. AI puts a massive strain on those core principles of Just and Bellow of fighting justly. I mean, can an algorithm really tell the difference between a soldier reaching for a weapon and a civilian reaching for their child? Can a machine really weigh the value of a military target against the risk to civilians? And the really big one, if an autonomous drone makes a mistake and commits a war crime, who's to blame? The programmer? The commander who deployed it? These aren't hypothetical questions anymore.
So you see how this unwritten rule book of war is constantly being revised. We've gone from ancient philosophy to changing ideas about humanity to the power of acting together. But now, with AI and autonomous weapons stepping onto the battlefield, we're left with a huge question. Who gets to write the next chapter? Will it be the diplomats and the philosophers, or will it be the programmers and the engineers? The answer to that is going to shape what conflict looks like for all of us.